Let's start off with Apple. They reported earnings and they're now down, I think, over 10% since just last week. So is this just Apple got too overvalued or what's going on with Apple stock?
I would say there's concerning trends in Apple's business. And I'm actually in the process, and I owe my paid newsletter readers a bit of a research report on Apple versus Google, because I think this particular point is really interesting in contrasting those companies, because I was talking about how like Google was a great value relative to Microsoft and relative to Apple. And since I've been talking about that, those have definitely converged. And a lot of it I've talked about right here in this live stream. I would say like what is happening, Apple's revenue has been down, I think it's at 3 or 4 quarters in a row, year over year. And you contrast that with Google, where everybody's like so worried about it, and their revenue, they reported up 7%. And I think Google was something that was down, but you can't always just look at that. iPhone sales are down, which is a big problem. And if you're seeing like a core business, like iPhones are such a big part of their business. If you see that, start to falter, then, you begin to get concerned about, some of the things that are happening. And I would say not only iPhone sales, like, Apple is talking about being an AI a lot. And obviously they were very early to like that kind of game with Siri. But if the expectation is that Siri is no longer a competitive technology with, something that Google makes or something that, Microsoft makes or whatever. And if that's the concern, because they really like, while they started to talk about it, and I believe Apple, can create great like products, like Apple's history is kind of filled. Like, I don't know if a lot of people know this story, but Apple tried to like aggressively compete with Google Maps at one point. And as good as they are with hardware and design or things like that, it was a miserable failure to a point like where they don't really even like point people to maps in the same way. And like there was a story about people going like getting guided to like a desert in Australia at one point because like I don't know, some flaw in Google Maps. So if you're talking about like AI chops, like Apple is not that great. And I'd say that there's like legitimate concerns there. When you see like a core business falling like that, where you see something like iPhone sales dropping when other core businesses on like their competitors or their big 7 competitors rising, that's big. That's a big concern for me. And it's a big concern where you're just like, oh, like Apple, like, and some of it is like, I look at it in terms of, and obviously I bragged about how ahead of the game Teslas are in terms of their AI and self-driving ability, because they don't use LiDAR and they just use kind of a powerful pre-programmed machine learning algorithm. But like, kind of combine like, yeah, do I think Apple could build like a kick-ass looking car, product design, everything like that on par with like a Tesla? I absolutely believe that. Like, do I believe, based on the fact that they couldn't even really get a maps product, right, that like they can execute on self-driving? Like theoretically they could, but we haven't necessarily seen anything in their tech, especially in like a history like maps, which is like that's the closest thing and like kind of like an elementary version of what a self-driving car would need to run. And like maps is still not that great. I mean, I don't use it that often, but I know not many people use it. And like if their AI was better, perhaps there'd be more of a reason to use it. And they just seem to have punted on that. So yeah, I have serious concerns about Apple, especially relative, like, I strongly prefer Google. I strongly prefer Meta. I think Meta and Google should not be trading at a discount to Apple and Microsoft, because I consider those are the businesses that I personally like more. One thing I will say about Apple that they do better than anyone else, they're great about secrecy. So like that's the thing. Like they could have something in the works that just like blows everything out of the water, which is why I'm not saying I'm betting against Apple. I'm just saying like I would rather own Google or Meta right now at these valuations. I want to be clear about that. But right now, if you look at their business right now, without some new powerful, like you might say Jobsian release, which I would say Tim Cook has not been as good at. Like if you look at just like new groundbreaking products, that's still, I'd say, more of a Steve Jobs thing than a Tim Cook thing, that I would say has held up the design principles and the market share very well, and kind of like the mystique and the recruiting of everything like that. But they haven't had, and few people do like see the world in the way that Steve Jobs does, where he could just like invent products that are just like, 0 to 1, you might call them. That's the big like That's the big like Peter Thiel concept of just like moving things forward like substantially. And like typically that's reserved for startups, but that was kind of what was crazy about Jobs. I would say he could have like 0 to 1 moments, even within a large entity. And like I think Tim Cook's great. He's smart. He executes on Apple's vision, existing vision very well. But do they still have that ability to just like create like completely differentiated products out of thin air? I'm not sure.